Hello, everybody. I hope that all of you are doing well on this beautiful spring day here in New York. My name is Jessica Williams. I am the Curator of History and Collections at the Intrepid Museum, and I want to thank all of you for joining us for another session of our virtual live programming. We really appreciate you joining us. I invite any of you to ask any questions or comment as I talk about some of our collections today. As many of you may know, our live streams are free. And if you'd like to support us in delivering all this exciting content, please click on the link below in the description. So today, I'm very excited to talk to you about two new things that we have opened at the museum within the past few months. So many of you may know that we've been closed and open and closed again, but we are now open again to the public. And during these periods, we really want to bring new things to our visitors, parts of the ship that have not been open before. So there are two things that we opened recently. One of them is an escalator, and one of them is an elevator. And these are things that are common to all of our lives, of course, but we're going to talk a little bit about how they work on board our aircraft carrier Intrepid. So here is a picture of Intrepid. Again, since we're not physically on Intrepid at this moment, it's always good to remind ourselves, taking a look at the ship, getting the sense of its size, so we can really think about our topic for today. And, you know, Intrepid is a very large ship. It's about 900 feet long. We'll get a bigger look at Intrepid and a smaller look at me here. And moving things around the ship is very difficult, right? It's designed, of course, to move airplanes on and off the flight deck. But you imagine this big ship, all of the people inside need to go from place to place. There are heavy things that need to get moved around the ship, things like food or other provisions. The airplanes also need to be moved around the ship. And some of the things that are used to move people and things around have been open to the public. Any of you who visited us, you may have had a chance to ride the aircraft elevator. You may have had the chance to walk through some of the really narrow passageways, go up some of the ladders. But we're going to look at this escalator and this elevator and talk about how these things helped the crew of Intrepid do the job they needed to do in the most efficient way possible. So first, we're going to start with this image, which is not an escalator or an elevator, but this is going to relate to the story of the escalator on Intrepid, which was not originally part of the ship when it was first built in the 1940s. So what you're looking at here is a photograph of one of Intrepid's ready rooms during World War II. So ready room is one of the rooms where the ship's aviators would sit, and a lot of the times they would just hang out in this room, but really what its purpose was to give pilots a chance, and air crewmen, a chance to prepare for their mission. So what we see here, if we're looking at this picture from World War II, it's taken from what would be, if you imagine the front of this ready room, looking back at a bunch of rows of seats. And these are all aviators who are sitting in these seats. They are wearing, you can see, their life vests, which were nicknamed May Wests. They have goggles on their head. It's World War II, so they have the canvas helmets on, and they're sitting as if they're looking at, maybe listening to somebody talking. So if you can imagine, perhaps the squadron air group commander, somebody is standing, squadron commander is standing at the front of the room, and maybe explaining what their mission is going to be. So there were a number of these ready rooms on Intrepid because there were multiple squadrons on board at a given time. And when the ship was built, these ready rooms were located right under the flight deck. So if you can imagine, the flight deck of the ship is here, and the ready rooms are on the deck right underneath, a deck called the gallery deck. And the reason why the ready rooms were placed on the gallery deck is, again, a lot of the way the ship is designed is for efficiency for flight operations. And so the designers of this class of ships put the ready rooms right underneath that flight deck because it would then be very quick for the pilots to get to their planes when it was time for them to fly their missions, right? So that was very quick, easy, just one ladder to get up and run to your aircraft and get ready to take off. Now, it's efficient for those things, but it turned out during World War II that the placement of the ready rooms in this location turned out to have some problems and actually to be quite vulnerable. And the reason for this we can see here. So this is, again, a photograph of Intrepid. This is taken in the fall of 1944. And what you see in this image are a number of crew members standing on the flight deck of Intrepid, and they're looking down. And what they're looking down at is a very big hole in the flight deck. And if you look at this hole closely, what you'll see is it is the shape of an airplane. You can see where the fuselage was, and off to the side, you can see where the wings crashed through the flight deck. This photo was taken in the aftermath of kamikaze attack on board Intrepid in November of 1944. And at the time, well, I say through all of Intrepid's service, the flight deck was primarily built out of wood. There was a really thin piece of steel, and then there were wood planks that were built on top of that very thin piece of steel. And there are a few reasons why the designers of the Essex class decided to do this. And they thought about it, whether or not it made sense to build a flight deck that was primarily made out of wood. And one of the reasons for this had to do with the weight of the ship, the design of the ship, and having the structure, just to put it simply, allowed more space to carry inside the ship to carry more aircraft. But they also thought that if the ship got damaged by a bomb or something, it would be fairly fast to just, get some boards, get some thin steel, put it over the deck, and then patch it up. So there were reasons for this, but the designers of the Essex class were not necessarily thinking that their enemy would crash airplanes directly into the ship. We in the West know these as kamikaze attacks, also known as special attack in Japan, but essentially having somebody fly an airplane targeting directly into the flight deck, often these planes are laden with bombs or fuel, was really more than the flight deck could stand. And you can see in this case what effect that had. Now remember what I just told you about the ready rooms. So again, we have the flight deck, we have the gallery deck. Oops, I always forget which way to orient my hand so that I'm not blocking where the picture is. But anyway, if you imagine the ready rooms right underneath, well, kamikaze airplane crashes into the flight deck, you now are causing catastrophic damage to those ready rooms underneath. And this is something that happened on board Intrepid in this kamikaze attack. There were actually two aircraft that crashed into Intrepid on this date, and one of them crashed through the flight deck and exploded in one of the ready rooms. At that time, there weren't pilots waiting in the ready room, but there were a number of radar men, so the people who worked in the Combat Information Center, trying to detect where friendly and enemy aircraft were around Intrepid. And over 30 of those men were killed in the ready room as a result of a kamikaze attack. And so this really gave the Navy pause about whether or not this was the best location for these ready rooms, because pilots are so essential for the operation of an aircraft carrier, of course. And the Navy invests so much time in training them and everything else. They want to make sure that, all crew members are safe, but losing a lot of pilots would be really devastating for the ship's ability to carry out its missions. So, the war ends and the Navy has some of these Essex class ships like Intrepid, and the Navy starts thinking about what makes the most sense going forward. Maybe we should move the ready rooms. And they did. They moved the ready rooms on Intrepid to a deck called second deck, which is under the hangar deck. So again, if we imagine our cross section of Intrepid here, we have the flight deck, the gallery deck is where the ready rooms were, the hangar deck, which is for those of you who've been to the museums, that's where the main exhibit space is. And then the deck below that deck is called second deck. And this seemed like a safer place to put the ready rooms because not only is it deeper and deeper in the ship and therefore safer from attack, the hangar deck, so the main, again, our main exhibit space right now, but also the place where aircraft were maintained and stored and all of that, that deck, the hangar deck, has about 2.5 inches of armored steel, essentially. It's called special treatment steel, but it was designed to stop bombs going deeper into the ship, which will come up again later when we talk about the elevator. But the idea is putting the ready rooms down on second deck would make it safer for pilots because it would be very difficult for enemy weapons to get all the way that far deep into the ship. So it was good to move the ready rooms for safety, but it did introduce some other challenges related to efficiency. So let's take a look at these guys here. These are 4 pilots who served on board Intrepid during the Vietnam War. And we take a look at this picture and they're standing there on the flight deck, but we get a look at some of the things that pilots wore or carried with them when they were on their missions. So we have hard helmets, we have survival vests. We're going to look at a couple examples of those in a second. These guys aren't carrying them, but pilots carried bags where they had maps. They had something called a knee board that they would put on their knee and clip their maps to it so they could navigate. Pilots carried a lot of stuff. Now, you remember I just told you the ready rooms are now deeper in the ship. So these pilots now, with all of their things, after they're getting briefed in their ready room, need to go up, 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 multiple decks to be able to get to their planes. So this was the problem that the Navy's thinking about. How can they help air operations be more efficient and pilots move around? So we'll look at that solution in a minute, but let's take a look at some objects associated with some of our aviators. There's so many cool things in the collection, and pilot helmets could be their very own discussion. In fact, we have some behind the scenes videos about helmets that, if you're interested, they're really great to check out. They talk about the difference between World War II helmets and jet age helmets and all of that. But here is an example of a pilot helmet, and this is a jet age era helmet. The person who wore this helmet served on board Intrepid in the early 1960s. His name is Bill Litwin, and he flew the AD Skyraider and later the A1 Skyraider, which we have in our collection. But you can see these are two different views of Bill's helmet. It has a visor. Well, it's a hard helmet. It has a visor, and with this kind of helmet, it had a clear visor or like a sunglasses visor that could be alternated. You see cords to plug in for radio attachments. It's also covered with some cool reflective tape. If you look at the side view, you can see some stars around the ears, lightning bolt going over the back. So this is a helmet. So our pilots in the previous picture were carrying their helmets. In that case, they weren't wearing them, but you can see it's a bulky kind of item. Another thing that pilots had with them on their missions was a survival vest. So this survival vest belonged to a different Intrepid pilot. His name is Gregory Harris. He flew off Intrepid in the early 1970s, and he flew a different kind of aircraft. He flew something called the E1 Tracer, which we have on our flight deck. If any of you have had a chance to visit us, the Tracer is very noteworthy because it has a big radome on the top. It was a radar carrying airplane. So this survival vest, all these pockets were packed with different things that pilots carried with them so that they would be ready for whatever eventuality might happen during their flight. Say they have to eject, say they end up landing someplace where they need to survive. Pockets have all sorts of different things in there that can help them with that. And if we look at one example, so this looks like a lot of itty bitty tiny things, and that's what it is. This is the contents of one of the survival kits that was inside one of the pockets when Mr. Harris donated his survival vest to the museum. And these survival kits, they come all wrapped up in this green plastic. Each thing is all wrapped up tight in there. So it's a lot of, we enjoy getting these because they're really fun to open and take apart and see what's in them. But this is, it's referred to as a survival, escape, and evasion kit. The acronym for that is SEEK. This is a SEEK 2 kit. And it includes lots of little items that could help you if you end up having to eject and land somewhere, right? So if you can see some of these tiny items on the top row, for instance, there's an arrowhead, there's a tiny knife in there. If you go, farther, or tiny like a blade. There is a single signaling mirror in here. There's a fishing kit in here. There's a bar of soap. There's some sunglasses. There's all sorts of things here that could help a pilot if needed during a mission. So all of this to say is that our pilots are carrying a lot of stuff. So they are now safer down. If we get back to the idea of moving around the ship, they're safer down on second deck. But it also takes a while to get up to the flight deck from there. So the Navy's solution to this was to take a piece of technology that was common in the civilian world and add it to some of these ships, including Intrepid. And that thing is an escalator. So if we take a look here, we have an image of the side of Intrepid. Let me make this a little bigger. So this is the starboard side of Intrepid. And in this picture, you can see the island sticking up. The bow of the ship is off to the right. And if we zoom in a little closer on this, you can see I have circled an area in yellow. And what is there? That there's sort of a gray kind of angled piece of steel, and that is the housing for the ship's escalator. And Intrepid's escalator was essentially just a normal escalator. There's nothing about it that's particularly specific to the Navy. The Navy built the steel housing around the outside of it, but it's essentially just bolted to the side of the ship. They didn't really have to do a lot of cutting into the ship to make space for it. It really was able to fit basically right on the side, again, with this housing to keep it protected from the weather. And the purpose of this escalator was to help pilots move from the hangar deck up to the flight deck. So it travels up or down. You can change the direction up or down to help pilots move from place to place. And we can take a look at one of the things that we have in the collection that's really interesting to me are piles and piles and piles of manuals associated with Intrepid. Lots and lots of books, and for all sorts of things. We have manuals for the escalator, which you can see here. We have manuals for ice cream maker. We have manuals for different kinds of tools and things they had in the shop. All sorts of different manuals that give us a sense of what the machinery was like. And for the people who served on the ship, it gave them an opportunity, it was meant for them to be able to troubleshoot and understand how it worked. So this is the instruction book for the electric stairway. They're actually, this is a Westinghouse escalator, but they refer to it as an electric stairway because the Otis Corporation had the copyright for the word escalator. So officially it's an electric stairway, and it's hard to see at this size looking at on a screen. But we have reproduced this in the museum, so if anybody loves looking at drawings and engineering things like that, it's fun to read all the little descriptions of what the parts are. But what you're looking at is a section drawing of the side, and then some other kind of cross sections going up and down the escalator. But this escalator, it was designed, it traveled a vertical distance of 22 feet, and it was supposed to move 33 people every minute. That's the speed of this escalator. That assumes that somebody's standing on every other step. And it had controls so that it could go up or go down. So if pilots are going up to the flight deck for their missions, you can hit the thing at the controls at the bottom and it will go up. Or at the top, you can hit it and go back down at the end of a mission. Here's another bit from the manual. If you ever wondered what a single escalator tread looks like, here is a picture of one. And it's described as being a step assembly. And what you see is the tread on the top. That's where people stand. You can see the kind of curved metal. So if you imagine yourself standing at the bottom of an escalator and looking at it, curved metal is what's going right underneath the step. And you can see wheels on the side, because essentially each of these steps are kind of chained together, and there's a motor that's helping them travel up some tracks that are going up, and then they kind of disappear underneath and go back down and just keep going and going and going. So here is what that step assembly looks like by itself. I appreciate this picture because most of us never really get to see disassembled escalators. Maybe you encounter, people working on them if you're in an airport or something like that. But it's a very nice, neat picture of what that looks like. So all of this is to say, this escalator was put on Intrepid in the mid-1950s. And here we see some happy customers, perhaps, I don't know, some of Intrepid's pilots in 1956 traveling up the escalator. So the escalator I mentioned goes between the hangar deck and the flight deck. So it doesn't go quite all the way down as far as where the pilots' ready rooms were, but they could climb up one ladder and then hop on the escalator and travel up to the flight deck. Now, the purpose of this escalator was really for pilots and air crewmen. So people who are in some aircraft are single-seater, sometimes there's more than one person in the airplane. And so really anybody who needed to go on flight missions would be able to use the escalator. And there's different thoughts about whether or not this was strictly followed. Some people say, oh, occasionally we got to use it even though we weren't necessarily involved with flight operations. But for the most part, it does seem that it was really people who needed it for flight operations that were traveling on the escalator. And I've encountered former crew members who worked in other areas of the ship who didn't even realize that the escalator was even there. It's kind of tucked around a corner, so it's not necessarily that obvious. Again, we saw the picture how it was bolted to the side of the ship. So even some of our staff were surprised to learn about it because it's in a little bit of a hidden corner. But it's open now. So here is a photograph taken recently looking up the escalator, and a good shout out to my colleagues in the operations department, also in the exhibits department, who did a lot of work on trying to restore the escalator to clean it up so visitors can walk up it. it no longer operates as an escalator, meaning the motors don't work. So if you come and visit us, you can take a walk up the escalator. The entrance point is on the hangar deck, and it's fairly. I mentioned it was tucked away, but one way to spot it is it's on the starboard side of the ship. So if you're walking back along the hangar deck, it's off to your left, and there is a light projected on the floor that points toward the escalator, and there's also some signage for it. We have one of the treads for the escalator out. So if you like to touch things, you can feel what that texture is like, and you can take a walk from the hangar deck to up to the flight deck, and imagine that you are a pilot on Intrepid. Although they would have had an easier ride than you because the escalator would be working, but still you can wander your way up there and appreciate this kind of a quirky solution to a problem, right? The problem of trying to keep aviators safe while also helping them move around the ship more efficiently. So that is the escalator. So we opened this up in the fall, and we now have one other thing that we really just opened, gosh, I guess 2 weeks ago, which is an elevator for a very particular purpose. So let's take a look at that. So here, again, there's a story, right? Because all these features of the ship, they're there for a reason. There's always a purpose for these features on board Intrepid. So what we're looking at here is a picture of an airplane. This is an A4 Skyhawk. This photo was taken in 1967 during the Vietnam War. And if we take a look at this airplane, and we do have a Skyhawk on display in the hangar deck, what you can see is underneath the wings of the airplane, in the center, you see under the fuselage is a white fuel tank. But underneath the wings of the airplane are bombs. So this picture is taken during the Vietnam War, and Intrepid's primary mission during the Vietnam War was bombing targets, mostly in North Vietnam, but sometimes in Laos and South Vietnam as well. And of course, back during World War II, the ship also was carrying a lot of bombs, torpedoes, and other kinds of weapons. So most of the photos I'm going to show you in this section relate to the Vietnam War, but of course, carrying weapons for airplanes has been part of Intrepid's mission from the very beginning. So these elevators we're going to look at have been on board from the start, unlike the escalator, which is a later addition. Anyway, so here we see our Skyhawk. What we can see here is that there appear to be 2 bombs under each wing. And how airplanes are armed depended on what the mission was at the time. So Intrepid carried a lot of bombs, again, depending on what the mission is. So here's another photo from the Vietnam War. This is a picture taken kind of on the back side of the island, which is the tower that rises from the flight deck. So if you walk around behind that, in that area while the ship was in service, the crew members would stage weapons that needed to go and be put on airplanes. So you can see them here, many of them stacked up. And, during 1967, which is around the time this picture was taken, during that whole deployment to Vietnam, the ship's aircraft dropped about 5,700 tons of bombs. So they could be moving around thousands of pounds of bombs in a day. So these were heavy, and they needed to be moved around to different parts of the ship. There are people who had the job of moving aircraft ordnance. Ordnance is another word for weapons around the ship. And we can see some of them here in this picture. These guys are Aviation Ordnancemen. That's the name for this job. Here they are on the flight deck. Again, this is 1967. And you can see them here on the flight deck. You see one guy, he's got a cart. He's pushing a single bomb on that yellow cart. There are other things staged on other carts in the background. Some of these guys are wearing red shirts, and on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier during Intrepid service and today, crew members would wear a different shirt that designates their job. Flight deck is busy, it's chaotic, it's noisy, and so wearing a different color shirt is a quick visual indication of who does what on the flight deck. So people who are responsible for ordnance or weapons wear red, and they're referred to as red shirts as a nickname for this job. So you see that some of these guys, these guys are wearing their red shirts. Some of them are not wearing any shirts, because you also imagine too, this is the Vietnam War. They're in the Gulf of Tonkin. I don't know, forget exactly what month this picture was taken, but they were there over the summer. It's very hot. So some of them have dispensed with their red shirts. They might end up getting a red sunburn as a result. But anyway, so here they are moving weapons around. And we can see another picture also taken on the flight deck of, you can see there's a couple other personnel here too, but you see a bunch of guys in red shirts. One guy is standing next to a bomb that's being affixed to the underside of a wing of an A4. Also, the guys are all kind of hunched over in the corner. What that appears to be is a jack for some of the larger weapons. They had a jack they could use to move it and attach it underneath the wings of the airplane. So these are all different ways that these ordnancemen move things around on the flight deck, which is ultimately the destination for all of these weapons. So we'll look at a couple things associated with these guys. Here is a red kind of cloth, maybe not quite a helmet, but a cap that again goes along with this idea of the colors of the aviation personnel on the flight deck. The particular one has a stencil that says V1 on the side. The crew or the V1 division worked on the flight deck. So this person presumably was part of that division. And again, it's bright red. If you look on the inside of it, there's a label that says, flight crewman's flight cap. So this is part of that whole uniform. And then if you look here, now, of course, these guys are mostly, when they're doing their job, wearing their red shirts. And on their red shirts, they're not wearing patches like this. But when they're wearing their white uniforms, this is the insignia for an aviation ordnanceman. So if you look, I personally like looking at all of the Navy rating insignia to see, see what symbolism was chosen to designate a particular job. So in this case, most of the ratings that have aviation in front of them tend to have wings on them. And in this case, there's a little bomb in the center with two wings sticking out from the side. So this is showing everybody that this person's job is to deal with weapons associated with aircraft. And I put on this one the back of it as well, because this one belonged to a guy who served on board the ship in 1943 during World War II, or I should say, served in the Navy in 1943. Did serve on Intrepid, I think a little bit later. But anyway, you can see that it's very tiny, but stitched in the top back of that chevron is the year 1943. So this is what is designating people who have this job. So, so I showed you a lot of pictures of the flight deck, but of course, bombs are just not sitting around on the flight deck unless they're needed. They live somewhere else in the ship. And where they live in the ship is deep, deep down in these spaces called magazines. So if you remember back when I was talking about the escalator, I mentioned that when the ready rooms were moved, they were moved down to second deck. And that was an armored deck. So that was the heavy armor on that deck. There's another armored deck a couple decks down from that. And then below that is where bombs were stored on Intrepid. Bombs came and were delivered often by ammunition ships that came alongside Intrepid and using a high line, so a wire going over the water to bring the weapons over. But then they need to get down into storage, and then they ultimately then need to get back up to the flight deck so they can be used for missions. And the thing that accomplished this is what is commonly known as a bomb elevator, also called a weapons elevator, because bombs aren't the only kind of weapons, of course, that are carried by aircraft. There are torpedoes and rockets and other things as well, but it's generally called a bomb elevator. And the bomb elevator is what moves these weapons around the ship. So what we're looking at here in this picture, this is actually not Intrepid, this is USS Princeton. It's another aircraft carrier. And this picture dates from the mid-1950s. So what you see are two guys inside the elevator, inside that door in the back. And then we can see off to the right, another bomb cart. We see the elbow. It's kind of hard to see, of another person who's potentially maybe going to move weapons out or move things into the elevator. So the elevator is what is doing the work of moving. So people are moving the weapons in a horizontal distance, right? Moving them around on carts and things. And the elevator is doing the work of moving the bombs in the vertical dimension. And what we're going to look at next are is a graphic showing the path of how things move around, because, again, the Navy's often thinking about how to, oops, I take it back, wrong. I'm going to jump to that in a minute in terms of how the Navy thinks about moving things around. I'm ahead of myself. I forgot about this picture and I like this one. So this is a picture this is on Intrepid. This is a cruise book. And what we see here is down in the magazine. So this is underneath the armored deck where all these weapons were stored. One of the things that the Navy is thinking about for safety is making sure that that heavy things can be moved around safely, and also that things can stay in one spot. So what we're looking at here are two men. They have a trolley thing kind of that they're going to attach to this bomb with chains. It attaches to rails on the overhead, so in the ceiling of the space, and they can use these trolleys to move the weapons around inside these magazines so that they can store them where they want them to be stored, and also if they need to move them toward the elevator, they can do that. And it's cool in these spaces that some of these trolleys and tracks still exist. They're not, these spaces are not open to the public, but one way to see as you're wandering around, or for us, for staff, you can see the rails in the ceiling, and it's a clue that heavy things like bombs are being moved around in those spaces. But anyway, there also were different kinds of sort of cradles and other things down in the magazines to make sure that once all these weapons were stored, that they're not shifting and rolling and moving around. So we have the magazines down deep in the ship, and then we have the flight deck, which is where they're needed. And so here's where our elevators come in. I also feel like I'm going to mix up saying escalators and elevator, which I probably have done a lot already. It's the hazard of opening these two things at the same time. Anyway, so this is where I want to explain the steps of how things moved around the ship, because I'm talking about bomb elevators, but they actually don't operate in one path. So there is not a single elevator that goes from the magazine up to the flight deck. They operate in two sections, which are referred to as stages. There is a lower stage bomb elevator and an upper stage bomb elevator. And each of those elevators only go, here, we'll look at that more closely in a minute. Each of them only go halfway through the ship. So the lower stage elevator on Intrepid goes from the magazines up to third deck. And again, for any of you who visited or have been on other aircraft carriers like Intrepid, third deck is also called the mess deck. So that's where the crew, most of the crew ate their meals. So the lower stage goes from the magazine to the third deck. And then the upper stage goes from the third deck up to the flight deck. And the Navy designed the elevators this way for a reason. And the reason was that they did not want to have a single shaft that goes from the flight deck straight down to the magazine, because if a bomb fell down into that chute all the way down and exploded in the magazine, it would be catastrophic for the ship. The last place you want anything exploding is down with a bunch of weapons, right? So the Navy designed these in two different stages so that this would not happen. And thinking about that, there's a couple ways that could happen. One is an enemy could have a really lucky hit, right? Maybe a skillful hit. I don't know. It's hard to hit something that precisely the size of a bomb elevator opening. But if a well-placed bomb, let's say, went all the way down and exploded a magazine, that would be a disaster. Another thing is there could just be human error, right? Somebody's moving something around on the flight deck. Maybe the top hatch isn't closed, a bomb falls down, and that could have an equally disastrous result. So this design was for safety. And Intrepid has 3 sets of these bomb elevators, but really 6 of them, right? So 3 lower stage and 3 upper stage elevators. So let's look more closely, and we'll trace the path of how these weapons moved through the ship. This is a generic view. It shows the right decks on Intrepid, but this is actually taken from another manual, an Aviation Ordnancemen training manual, and our wonderful graphic designer cleaned it up and made this so that it can show more specific to Intrepid. So let's take a look. We'll walk through a few of these. So down here at the bottom, this deck is labeled first platform, and circled in orange is the weapons storage area, the magazine. On some parts of Intrepid, there are also weapons stored in the deck below, still connecting to the same sets of bomb elevators, but essentially that's where the weapons are stored. Then crew members down in that magazine move the weapons into the lower stage bomb elevator, which is circled here in blue on this picture. And that travels up a few decks. So the weapons get moved on manually into the elevator. Crew members operate the elevator, and they move the weapons then up to the third deck. At the third deck, see another orange arrow just appeared here. Crew members then take the weapons out and shift them over to the upper stage bomb elevator. And this is where then, that's the upper stage bomb elevator. And then the weapons travel up to the flight deck. Or sometimes they might stop along the way for assembly. So the hangar deck, for example, which is where visitors can see look into the elevator. they might pull them out for assembly or whatnot. But we'll just say for this example that they're taking them all the way up to the flight deck, which is up here on the very top. So they start at the bottom, go up one elevator, get shifted over, and then move all the way up. Here we go. Also, I realized one thing that I meant to mention before, but did not, and it would be an interesting topic to talk about on another day, is the fact that Intrepid during the Cold War often carried nuclear weapons as well. And those were intended for, if needed, of course, it's the Cold War. And so there are, one of the elevators connects to that space as well. These were referred to as special armaments by the Navy. And so one of these elevators does connect down to that space as well. So what we're looking at here, we'll actually go back to this bigger. So this is an image, again, to situate ourselves and to think about how you can come and look at this if you like. This is a view of the hangar deck from 1956, looking from forward, down, back, aft, right? So there's nothing in here at this space in this picture. If you were standing here today, you would see exhibits and aircraft and all sorts of things, but this is very wide open and empty. And of course, it needed to be so that crew members could move airplanes and helicopters around to take care of them. And there's a yellow arrow here, and it's pointing to a white door. And that white door is the opening to the bomb elevator that we have now opened for the public. And so the last thing to take a look at here is a picture of what we have been working on. So this is a picture from a couple weeks ago. So this is still when our crew is under construction on the elevator. But if you look at it, what we have done to make this visible to visitors is we have put a glass wall in front of the opening to the bomb elevator. So that door that I just showed you on the previous slide, here we can look back, remind ourselves, that door, which is closed in this picture, right? If we go back to this one, is open here. So we've opened it up and installed this glass wall so people can safely look down, because it is a bit of a way down there. And so that you can stand and take a look down and look up and see the distance traveled by one of these upper stage bomb elevators on Intrepid. This elevator shaft had not really been dealt with at all during the museum's history. Certainly not in I've been at the museum for about 13 years at this point. It hasn't really been touched too much in my time. And so our amazing crew, operations and exhibits, scraped and painted all of this. You could still see the markings on this yellow and white hatch that could be closed, right, to close off that space if needed, so that there's not a hole in this armored deck. So the paint was all still visible. So we made stencils to be able to get the right markings on this hatch. And you can look in and look up and look down and see into the elevator. We also have some photos. I showed you more photos today than we have displayed there, but we have a couple other ones. And there's also some video there showing ordnancemen or aviation ordnancemen on Intrepid, as well as other aircraft carriers using the bomb elevator. So you can see actually how through video or through historic footage, what it actually was like to operate the elevator. And it's a very important part of the ship to be able to move things around. So I think that basically covers these two new aspects of the ship that we're so excited to have opened. Again, it's the pilot's escalator, it's the bomb elevator. The way to see both of those things is from the hangar deck, which is the main deck where most of the exhibits are. You can ask somebody at our information desk if you come and pay us a visit, where you can access these two things. We're so excited to be able to show more parts of the ship to visitors. So even, these are very kind of workaday sorts of things, but they're so essential to the ship's ability to function. So thanks for joining me today. We will be continuing to do these collections showcases and also other live programming. So I hope that you will check our website. Also, you can subscribe to this channel so that you'll get information about what's streaming, what other interesting topics are happening, and all of that. And you can find links below. Also, if you're able, your donations enable us to continue this and all the rest of our wonderful programming. And we appreciate so many of your generosity if that is possible for you. But yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And I look forward to seeing you all again on a future live stream. Take care.